Every day the world loses legends, icons whose lives shaped our culture, our memories, our hearts. From actors to musicians, pioneers to visionaries, their stories deserve to be remembered and celebrated. Welcome back. Here we honor the lives, achievements, and legacies of those who passed, today keeping their memory alive for generations to come. In the quiet early hours of April 24, 2026, a solemn piece of news began to spread across Michigan and far beyond it. Donald W. Riegle Jr., a man whose voice once carried through the halls of Congress with strength and conviction, had passed away at the age of 88. For many Americans, it felt like the closing of a chapter that had stretched across some of the nation's most defining political years. His passing was not simply the loss of a former senator. It was the farewell to a public servant whose life had been shaped by principle, persistence, and a belief that leadership could still serve ordinary people. In Flint, Michigan, where his story first began in 1938, memories seemed to return with special weight. This was the city that raised him, the place where his family's roots ran deep, and where a young boy once learned the values that would guide him for decades. Long before Washington knew his name, Donald Riegle was shaped by the working spirit of his hometown. Flint was a place of industry, resilience, and ambition. Those early lessons would stay with him, even as his journey led him to the center of American power. Friends and former colleagues often described him as thoughtful, driven, and unafraid to evolve. That evolution became one of the most remarkable parts of his career. Elected to Congress in the 1960s, Riegle entered politics during a period of national uncertainty. America was changing and so was he. While many leaders remained fixed in old positions, he became known for challenging expectations, sometimes even changing his own political direction when conscience demanded it. He always believed public service meant listening first, one former Michigan aide shared. He never forgot who sent him there. Those words reflected a career that was rarely simple. Donald Riegle served 5 terms in the House of Representatives before spending 3 terms in the United States Senate. Across those years he became involved in some of the country's most urgent conversations: economic reform, banking oversight, and the protection of American workers. His work often carried the careful tone of someone who understood that policies on paper could shape real lives at kitchen tables across the nation. But his path was not without challenge. Politics, especially in turbulent decades, demanded difficult choices. Riegle faced criticism, political pressure, and moments when the cost of standing firm could be deeply personal. Yet even opponents often acknowledged his seriousness. He was not known for theatrical politics. He was known for substance. As chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, Riegle stepped into one of the nation's most sensitive arenas. Financial systems, consumer trust, and corporate responsibility all crossed his desk. During those years, his influence reached beyond Michigan. His decisions helped shape national discussions about accountability and reform. For many Americans, even if they did not know his name, they felt the effects of his work. Former President Bill Clinton once described leaders like Riegle as steady hands in uncertain times. It was the kind of praise that reflected his reputation, not always loud but deeply present. Beyond Washington, there was another side to Donald Riegle. He was also a husband, father, and thinker. Those closest to him often spoke less about the senator and more about the man who valued conversation, reading, and reflection. Politics was his profession, but family remained his private foundation. In quieter moments, away from cameras and speeches, he was said to be deeply thoughtful about the future of the country he had served. His death has also stirred reflection about a generation of public servants shaped by duty before spectacle. Riegle belonged to an era when politics, though fierce, often carried a stronger sense of institutional respect. He represented a bridge between changing Americas, from post-war optimism to modern political complexity. Social media tributes and statements from former colleagues carried a similar message. Donald Riegle dedicated his life to Michigan and the nation. One tribute read, "His legacy is written in service." And perhaps that is where his story carries its deepest meaning. Not in one bill, one election, or one speech, but in endurance. in showing up year after year through changing administrations and shifting public moods, in believing that government, at its best, could still be a place of responsibility. As flags lowered and tributes continued, many were left asking what remains after such a life. The answer may be found in the institutions he helped shape, the people he represented, and the example he leaves behind. Donald W. Riegle Jr. may no longer walk the corridors of power, but his imprint remains in the public life he helped build. In the end, his story is not only about politics. It is about faith and service. From Flint to Washington, from local roots to national consequence, he carried with him the quiet determination of a man who believed leadership should mean something more. And now, as America remembers him, that belief may be one of the greatest legacies he leaves behind. As the sun rose over ballparks that once echoed with roaring crowds, a quieter sadness settled across the baseball world. News began to spread that Eliseo Rodríguez Delgado, one of the game's most dependable catchers, had passed away. For many fans, his name may not have always stood at the center of headlines, but for those who understood baseball's deeper rhythm, his loss carried real weight. He was one of those rare players whose value was often felt more than spoken. And now, as tributes began to emerge, many were left asking how a man so steady could leave behind such a profound silence. Born in the Dominican Republic, Eliseo Rodríguez entered baseball during a time when the sport itself was changing. The path was not easy. 4 young Latin American players of his generation, reaching Major League Baseball, demanded more than talent. It required endurance, sacrifice, and often quiet courage. Rodríguez carried all 3. Long before bright stadium lights and packed American arenas, there was a young player with determination in his eyes and a glove that would soon become his signature. His journey to the majors was built not on noise but on persistence. He was never known as the loudest figure in the room. Instead, he became respected for something perhaps more lasting: reliability. Eliseo was the kind of teammate every clubhouse needed, one former player once reflected. He showed up, did the work, and made everyone around him better. That quiet discipline became the foundation of a career that stretched across several major league teams, including the New York Yankees, Kansas City Royals, Milwaukee Brewers, California Angels, and Los Angeles Dodgers. In an era filled with larger-than-life personalities, Rodríguez often stood in contrast. He was composed behind the plate, focused on the game's finer details, and trusted by pitchers who knew his presence brought calm. For catchers, the role has always carried a special burden. They are protectors, strategists, and silent leaders. Every crouch behind home plate demands physical toughness, but also mental precision. Eliseo Rodríguez understood this better than most. He was not simply catching pitches. He was guiding games, reading batters, and often carrying responsibilities invisible to casual fans. As baseball transformed through the 1970s and beyond, Rodríguez remained a consistent presence. He played during years when the sport expanded, cultures shifted, and the game's identity evolved. Through all of it, he remained respected not only for his athletic ability, but for his professionalism. There were no grand controversies attached to his name. No desperate search for attention. Instead, his legacy was built in quieter ways, through innings played, trust earned, and the respect of teammates who understood his value. One social media tribute from a former fan captured that feeling simply: "He may not have been the loudest star, but he was part of baseball's heart." That sentiment seemed to follow news of his passing. Across baseball communities, fans remembered a player who represented an era when consistency itself could be greatness. For many Latino athletes, Rodríguez also represented something deeper: a generation that helped open doors wider for those who would follow. His career was not always measured in glamour, but baseball has never belonged only to superstars. It also belongs to the steady hands, the durable players, and the trusted veterans who shaped the game from within. Rodríguez was one of them. Off the field, those who knew him often described him as humble and grounded. Fame did not seem to define him. He carried himself with the same measured presence that marked his playing days. In many ways, he represented a fading style of athlete, one whose career spoke loudly enough on its own. As his passing became known, the sadness carried a special kind of reflection. It was not only grief for one player, but for a generation of baseball slowly becoming memory. Eliseo Rodríguez's life reminded fans of a time when the game was built inning by inning, often by men whose names were not always celebrated enough. Baseball remembers its builders, one former coach reportedly said. And Eliseo was one of them. That may be the quiet truth at the center of his story. He was a builder. A catcher who helped shape games, support teams, and strengthen the sport during important years. His work was often understated but never unimportant. Now, as stadium lights continue to shine and new generations step onto the field, his chapter becomes part of baseball's larger history. The crowds may move forward, but somewhere in the memory of the game his presence remains. In the crouch behind the plate, in the patience of a seasoned catcher, and in the discipline that made him respected. Eliseo Rodríguez Delgado may have played with quiet strength, but his legacy speaks with lasting clarity. He will be remembered not only for the teams he served, but for the dignity, steadiness, and heart he brought to America's pastime. And in the gentle space between baseball's past and future, his story still waits, like the sound of a game that never truly fades. In the soft silence of Hollywood's morning, as tributes slowly began to appear across the film world, a different kind of loss settled over cinema. Dean Talley-Ross, the visionary artist whose imagination helped shape some of America's most unforgettable films, had passed away. His name may not have always stood in bright lights before audiences, but the worlds he created were seen by millions. From shadow-filled crime families to the haunting chaos of war, his work lived inside stories that changed cinema forever. And now, with his passing, many were left reflecting on a quiet question. How do you measure the life of a man whose genius was often hidden behind the camera, yet visible in every frame? For generations of movie lovers, films like The Godfather Part 2 and Apocalypse Now were more than stories. They were experiences. Their settings felt alive, their worlds carried emotional weight, and every room, street, and battlefield seemed to breathe with meaning. Much of that power came from Dean Talley-Ross. Born with an artistic eye and a gift for visual storytelling, Talley-Ross became one of Hollywood's most respected production designers. Yet unlike actors or directors, his brilliance worked quietly. He was an architect of emotion, building not just sets but entire realities. His craft was not simply decoration. It was atmosphere, history, and feeling. Dean didn't just design scenes, one colleague once said. He built memory. That memory became part of some of the greatest achievements in American film history. Working closely with legendary director Francis Ford Coppola, Talley-Ross helped create the visual soul of The Godfather. Every dark wood office, every golden wedding scene, every shadowed hallway carried intention. His work gave the Corleone family's world its haunting elegance. But his artistry did not stop there. When Apocalypse Now demanded a descent into madness, Talley-Ross once again shaped the impossible. The film's vast, surreal landscapes and war-torn environments were not merely backdrops. They became emotional extensions of fear, chaos, and moral collapse. Audiences may have watched the performances, but they also felt the spaces around them, and that was Dean's quiet power. In an industry often driven by fame, Talley-Ross remained something different. He was deeply respected but rarely loud. His reputation was built not on celebrity but on mastery. He understood that visual design could guide emotion before a single line was spoken. As younger filmmakers studied his work, many came to realize how much of cinema's emotional language had been shaped by artists like him. Talley-Ross belonged to a generation that viewed filmmaking as total world building. Every wall, every texture, every detail mattered. His work taught us that place is part of story, one modern production designer shared after news of his death. He made worlds feel human. That humanity became central to his legacy. Though his films often explored power, violence, or psychological darkness, his designs grounded them in emotional truth. He knew beauty could feel tragic. He knew chaos could feel intimate. Few artists balanced those contradictions so carefully. Away from the cameras, Talley-Ross was often described as thoughtful, intelligent, and deeply committed to his craft. He was not chasing attention. He was chasing authenticity. For him, design was storytelling in physical form. As Hollywood mourned, there was also a growing sense of gratitude. Dean Talley-Ross did not simply contribute to films. He helped define how some of America's greatest cinematic stories were remembered. His fingerprints remain on masterpieces studied by students, honored by critics, and loved by audiences around the world. His passing also marks the fading of a remarkable era, one shaped by filmmakers who believed cinema was an art form built carefully by many hands, not just a spotlight for a few stars. Talley-Ross represented those hands. Quiet, skilled, and essential. One tribute from a fellow filmmaker read simply, "He gave shape to greatness." And perhaps that is the most fitting way to understand his life's work. Dean Talley-Ross gave shape to stories that might otherwise have felt incomplete. He transformed scripts into living spaces, ideas into visual history, and imagination into legacy. Now the sets are still. The sketches are complete. But his vision remains. It remains in the amber glow of the Godfather's family halls. It remains in the feverish shadows of Apocalypse Now. It remains wherever cinema reaches for emotional truth through image and space. Dean Talley-Ross may have worked behind the scenes, but his artistry was never truly hidden. It lives on in every unforgettable frame he helped create. And as future generations return to those timeless films, they may once again step into the worlds he built, quietly reminding us that some of cinema's greatest architects are never fully gone.